Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button to support the channel and stay updated on more historical stories. Genocide in the death camps. The architecture of absolute destruction. The genocide carried out in the death camps during the Second World War was not simply an episode of extreme violence. It was a fundamentally new form of mass murder, one that combined ideology, bureaucracy, technology, and obedience into a single, lethal system. Never before had a modern state mobilized so many institutions for the sole purpose of exterminating entire groups of people. The death camps were not accidents of war. They were carefully planned instruments of genocide, created to eliminate millions of human beings with speed, secrecy, and efficiency. Their existence forces humanity to confront an uncomfortable truth: that civilization itself can be turned into a weapon when moral boundaries collapse. Ideology as a weapon. At the core of the genocide was an ideology that denied the humanity of entire populations. Jews were portrayed not as individuals, but as a collective threat. Roma and Sinti were depicted as criminals by nature. People with disabilities were labeled as burdens. Slavic populations were considered inferior and expendable. Language played a critical role. Words like parasites, disease, and contamination were used deliberately. Violence was framed as a medical or defensive necessity. Killing became treatment. Deportation became resettlement. Murder became special handling. This linguistic transformation was essential. By removing human identity from victims, perpetrators could commit atrocities while perceiving themselves as servants of a higher mission rather than criminals. Escalation toward total annihilation. Genocide did not begin with gas chambers. It began with exclusion. Laws stripped people of citizenship, professions, education, and property. Social isolation followed legal discrimination, pushing targeted groups to the margins of society. Forced emigration initially appeared to be the solution. When this failed, ghettos became instruments of slow death. Overcrowding, starvation, and disease killed hundreds of thousands before the first death camps reached full operation. The invasion of Eastern Europe marked a decisive escalation. Mobile killing units followed the armies, executing entire communities in forests, ravines, and fields. These massacres were brutal and public, but they exposed a problem for the regime. Mass shootings were inefficient, psychologically damaging to the shooters, and difficult to conceal. The leadership sought a method of killing that would be faster, less visible, and more systematic. The creation of death camps. The death camps were the solution. Unlike concentration camps, which exploited forced labor, death camps existed primarily for extermination. Most victims were never registered as prisoners. Their lives ended within hours of arrival. The principal death camps included Auschwitz-Birkenau, Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, Chelmno, and Majdanek. These camps were deliberately located in occupied Poland. This region offered extensive rail networks, relative secrecy, and distance from populations that might object. The camps were designed to look temporary and functional, hiding their true purpose behind fences, trees, and euphemisms. Deportation as the first stage of murder. Deportation was not merely transportation. It was an integral phase of the killing process. Orders were delivered with bureaucratic precision. People were given hours or minutes to assemble. They were instructed to bring documents, valuables, and clothing. The illusion of resettlement was crucial. Resistance was less likely if victims believed survival was possible. Cattle cars became moving prisons. Dozens of people were crammed into sealed wagons with no sanitation, little air, and no water. Journeys lasted days. Screams, suffocation, and despair filled the darkness. Corpses often lay among the living when trains arrived. By the time the doors opened, many were already dead. Those who survived were physically and mentally broken, precisely as intended. Arrival. Terror and confusion. Arrival at the death camps was engineered to disorient. Shouting guards, barking dogs, floodlights, and chaos prevented understanding or organized resistance. At Auschwitz-Birkenau, selections occurred immediately. A gesture of a hand determined fate. Those considered capable of labor were temporarily spared. The rest were sent directly to their deaths. Children were almost always killed. Elderly people rarely survived selection. Mothers were separated from children in seconds, often without realizing it was the last moment they would ever see them. No explanations were given. Confusion was deliberate. Knowledge was dangerous. The deception of the gas chambers. Gas chambers were disguised as showers or disinfection facilities. Victims were ordered to undress, sometimes given towels or soap. This deception reduced panic and made the process more efficient. Once sealed inside, poison gas was released. The experience was one of terror and agony. Victims clawed at walls, screamed for air, and crushed one another in desperation. Death was neither instant nor peaceful. Afterward, specially selected prisoners, themselves condemned to death, removed the bodies. They were forced to sort corpses, extract gold teeth, cut hair, and prepare bodies for cremation or burial. These units lived under constant threat and were periodically murdered to eliminate witnesses. The machinery of industrial killing. What distinguished the death camps from previous massacres was scale and organization. Killing became routine. Schedules determined how many transports would arrive each day. Engineers calculated cremation capacity. Administrators tracked numbers as statistics. Doctors participated not to heal, but to select who would live temporarily and who would die immediately. Clerks filed reports. Guards followed orders. Train drivers delivered human cargo. Genocide became a process, repeatable, measurable, and optimized. This system depended not only on fanatics, but on ordinary individuals performing specialized tasks while distancing themselves from the outcome. Psychological destruction of victims. The camps were designed not only to kill bodies, but to destroy identity. Names were replaced with numbers. Hair was shaved. Clothing was confiscated. Personal possessions vanished. Starvation weakened resistance. Humiliation crushed dignity. Random violence created constant fear. Yet even in these conditions, victims found ways to preserve humanity, sharing food, comforting children, reciting prayers, or remembering names. These acts of compassion were forms of resistance against a system designed to erase the individual. Resistance inside the death camps. Resistance was extraordinarily difficult, yet it occurred. Prisoners in Sobibor and Treblinka organized armed revolts, killing guards and setting parts of the camps on fire. Hundreds attempted escape. Most were hunted down, but the revolts forced the closure of those camps. In Auschwitz, prisoners smuggled explosives and damaged crematoria. Others recorded evidence, buried documents, or memorized names to preserve the truth. Resistance did not always mean survival. Often it meant choosing how to die, with dignity, defiance, or solidarity. The outside world. Knowledge and inaction. Information about mass murder reached the outside world through escapees, resistance networks, and intelligence reports. While details were often dismissed as exaggerated, enough was known to raise alarm. Yet decisive action was limited. Political priorities, anti-Semitism, disbelief, and wartime constraints contributed to inaction. The genocide continued largely uninterrupted until the camps were reached by advancing armies. The death camps were not only a failure of morality within the regime that created them, but also a failure of international response. Collapse of the system and death marches. As defeat approached, efforts were made to erase evidence. Camps were dismantled, records were destroyed. Prisoners were forced on death marches toward the interior. These marches killed tens of thousands. Starvation, exposure, and executions reduced human beings to moving shadows. When liberation came, it revealed a world beyond imagination. Skeletal survivors, piles of bodies, and the physical remnants of systematic murder. Aftermath and justice survivors faced enormous challenges. Many had lost entire families, homes no longer existed, communities were gone. Trials brought some accountability, but justice was incomplete. Many perpetrators reintegrated into post-war society. Survivors carried trauma that would last a lifetime. Testimony became an act of responsibility, a way to speak for those who could not. Meaning and warning. The death camps demonstrate that genocide is not the result of chaos, but of order without conscience. They show how ordinary systems, law, medicine, transportation, administration, can become tools of annihilation. Memory is not only about honoring victims, it is about recognizing warning signs, dehumanization, propaganda, obedience, silence. Genocide does not begin with killing. It begins with words, with exclusion, with indifference. Conclusion. The genocide in the death camps was one of the most deliberate crimes in human history. It was constructed step by step, justified by ideology, and executed through modern systems. To remember the death camps is to accept a moral obligation, to defend human dignity, to question authority, and to refuse the normalization of hatred. The ashes of the camps speak a warning, not only about the past, but about the choices humanity continues to face.